than ever.
Yeah.
And welcome back. You know, perhaps the most difficult thing to write, I can say this as an amateur poet, is poetry. And we're here with a very fine one today, LAMBDA Award nominee Brian Teare. Brian, welcome.
Thank you.
So, how did a nice boy from Alabama end up here in California?
You know, I never really, I'm one of those people who didn't ever want to come here or think about coming here, but I got a fellowship to Stanford after I finished my master's degree in poetry at Indiana University. And so I came here to go to Stanford and had 2 years here. And then I think I just, in that way that people do with San Francisco, it was hard to leave, hard to find a reason to leave. And there's a really awesome poetry community here. There's a long literary history associated with the Bay Area, so it seemed like a good place to be.
Now, you've become very well known for your work, and now you've been nominated for a LAMBDA Literary Award that'll be coming up in a few weeks. How does that make you feel? Does it surprise you?
You know, this is my third book, and neither previous books had been nominated for the award, one of which I thought was probably maybe because it concerned growing up gay in the South and my family coming out, sort of all this kind of tropes of gay literature, especially in the 20th century. Like, I thought that one might have some, so I was surprised that finally something has happened, which is great. I'm really excited. I'm actually really excited. I'm very honored. Because a lot of the people that have also been nominated are poets that I really admire. So
who are some of those poets that you admire now, contemporary, and also some of those voices from the past that made you think, wow, that really makes me want to put pen to page?
Yeah. Well, two of the people who are nominated this year are not alive. They're posthumous nominations, which is kind of unusual, and they're actually two poets who are really important to me. One is a poet named James L. White. His book is called The Salt Ecstasies, and it's been reissued. I think it was published when I was 6 in 1980, and he died right after it was published. Never really lived to see how important the work would become. He was so important to me, I visited his grave when I was in graduate school, because he's buried in Indianapolis. So I drove from Bloomington to Indianapolis, like made a little pilgrimage. So it's amazing to be nominated with the same poet who is really important. And then James Schuyler is another poet this is a posthumous collection, but also Michael Klein, a really important poet and anthologist who's still with us. And Greg Hewitt, another great poet. So it's kind of amazing to me to be among these
luminaries.
Yeah.
How does your poetry come to you? In a flash? Do you get a line? Do you get a thought? Do you get a feeling? Every writer I've ever spoken with says it's different for them.
And every poem is different. Every poem, some are very fast, some come sort of in that romantic way that people imagine it comes like in a flash. Sometimes that's really true, but I have to say, probably it's also really rare. I think for every poem that gets delivered, you know, like Athena from your forehead, there's like 10 other poems that you like stayed up, you know, night after night trying to get it right.
Now, are you a poet who likes form or content, or are all of your poems different? I mean, do you stick to some poets like, a villanelle or a haiku or things that are very structured, they're almost like sculpture, or are you freeform?
I would say that I'm a good mix of the two. That I am, I was trained, like my initial teachers did train me in form, European classical form, rhyme and meter, that I never felt particularly comfortable with or in love with, but I think as I grew older, I figured out a way to find my own sort of mix of kind of like free verse with some more, you might just say, more constraints around it. So I'm kind of someone who I like both. I don't feel like I have to choose.
Right. Read us one of your poems, if you would.
I certainly will.
And tell us about it and this collection while you're finding it. Where does this come from? Is this your new book or your?
Yes, this is this is Pleasure. It's nominated for a LAMBDA Award, so it came out last fall. And this poem is called Torn Text. It's a book of elegies for my partner who died in 1999 of AIDS-related complications. So most of the poems are poems of mourning. So this is an example of one. And really it's about what happens, this particular poem, Torn Text, is about kind of what happens to language when you're mourning someone. Because oftentimes you are at a loss for words, and yet you want to speak or you want to write. What damage desires text suffers surface to abrade, puncture, lacerate. Here white thighs and the poem, here the paper deteriorates, and the body of the poem, the paper gets worse, having what mouths, holes. I cannot forgive him the elegy, but here the paper is torn, mending the kiss, sewing cuts inside. And for me, one of the things, my experience of mourning and also of writing during mourning was, when someone dies and they're fairly young or they had been fairly healthy for a while, you still are incredibly erotically attached to the person who's gone. And so this idea that one of the reasons that people write during mourning is to kind of bring that person back. But if the body is not, their body is injured or not whole, like language kind of, and the body of the poem itself has that feeling of being damaged.
Well, and also the way you read that poem now, there's a lot of feeling the way you read it. Was it painful for you to read?
Not right at this moment, but often I have to say in reading, especially the poems from the first half of this book, which were written quite close to the time that he died, it comes right back, and I feel very close. But that's the point of elegy. That's one of the points, is that you kind of want to bring the person closer, to bring them back. But it's not, it's also very uncomfortable if it works. Yeah. So I guess one thing I'm saying is like, hey, it worked. Like, I'm a pretty good poet.
Yeah. Listening to you read that, elegy is a poetry form that I like a lot. I've often thought that one of the greatest was the one by one of my personal, if not my favorite poet, Frank O'Hara, The Day Lady Died.
Yeah, that's an amazing poem. And it's he's amazing too, because he can be light and funny and still convey this sense of mourning and of urgency, which I think also that's a poem for someone he didn't know personally very well, so you can maybe have different kinds of tone in there. Whereas, like, for me, I think it was much harder to have a sense of shifting of tones. That mourning was more consistently one kind of feeling. Right,
right. Now, if someone wants to learn more about the LAMBDA Literary Awards, they can go online to...
Yes. Yes, they can go. LAMBDA Literary Foundation has a great website.
And they can just search and find it.
Yes.
We've been speaking with Brian Teare. Wish you luck at the LAMBDA Literary Awards. I'm David Perry. We'll see you next week on 10%. Good night.